Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. I recently shared this story for the first time in a True Scary Stories group on Facebook. I got a lot of feedback from people who lived in the same town I did when this event happened. It felt good to finally share my experience. Shortly after posting, a woman contacted me and physically threatened me and my family if I wrote about him. If I wrote about him again. She believes him innocent. It spooked me. I took my story down. I don't need weirdos like her in my life. I've since done some thinking about this and wanted to post my story again somewhere anonymously. It's my experience, and I'm not going to let some crazy child killer dater bitch scare me. So here it is. I originally thought this incident happened in January of 1984. I now realize it was probably later, in 1983. I was 8 years old and lived in Aurora, Colorado, a suburb southeast of Denver. Colorado, we lived in a brand new subdivision, and I loved it. Our house was busy. I had 3 older sisters, an older brother, a grandmother, and my mom living in our home at the time. My 10-year-old sister and I shared a bedroom on the main floor. Our house was ranch style. I loved this room. My twin bed was pushed up against the wall that had a window facing into our backyard. I liked to push the curtains aside at night, perch my elbows on the windowsill, and look outside. The window was elevated, but not so high that I couldn't see into the yard easily. My older sisters shared the room next to us, and my grandmother was in a large room across a small hallway from us. My mother had a finished bedroom all the way downstairs in the basement. My brother had the rest of the basement. He was 16 years old at the time and had a lot of friends who were always coming and going. I remember our house always being full of guests. We had a really cold spell hit us that week. It was super icy out, and my sister and I had been playing in the backyard. Our backyard had not yet been enclosed with a fence. We had these circular snow sleds that we would stand on and glide across the slick parts of the grass. We weren't good at putting our outdoor toys away, and had left them strewn across the lawn. That night, something woke me out of a sound sleep. Then I heard a noise outside my window. It sounded like someone was slowly walking across the snow in the backyard. I could hear the frozen grass crunching under their feet. I then heard someone say shit or another explicit word and something clink. I perched up out of bed, moved my curtain aside, and looked out the window. I think I originally thought I would see my brother or one of his friends out there. He often came in late at night past curfew and usually snuck through the backyard into an open basement window. I remember thinking that he shouldn't be doing this on a school night, and I was going to tell my mother in the morning that he woke me up. It wasn't my brother. I saw a young man, probably in his early 20s, that I didn't recognize. I made eye contact with him and then quickly scanned the rest of the yard for my brother. I didn't see him anywhere. I was going to move away from the window, but the man's eyes were glued to mine, and he started walking towards my gaze. I froze. I couldn't move. He came as close as he could to the glass. He smiled at me. It was an eerie smile. It was an "oh, look. You caught me doing something I shouldn't be doing" kind of smile. I remember he had crystal blue eyes, almost gray. Something about his expression was not right. It took me a few seconds to realize I was feeling fear. He was neither a friend of my brother's nor supposed to be in our yard at that time of night. I panicked, jumped off my bed, and quickly ran downstairs to tell my mother. Once I got to the basement, I saw that my brother was sound asleep in his bed as well. This scared me more, as I knew now for sure that this man in our yard was most likely not a friend of my brother's. My mom calmed me down, came upstairs, turned the light on outside, and looked into the yard from the sliding glass door windows. She didn't see anyone. I remember her not making a big deal out of it, and I ended up sleeping in the basement bedroom with her the rest of the night. I didn't sleep well. I wondered why that man was in our yard and where he went. I remember feeling scared that he might come back. I don't know the exact timeline, but I am guessing it was a few weeks later that a family a few streets over from us were murdered in the middle of the night by an intruder with a hammer and a knife. The father, mother, and 7-year-old daughter were killed, and a 3-year-old daughter was left for dead, but miraculously survived. This crime sent our entire community over the edge. The police did not seem to know who had done this horrible thing or why. All we knew was that the hammer killer probably chose their house at random and came in through an open garage door. No one in my family mentioned to me the man I saw in our yard again. I asked my mother about it years later, and she tensed up. The hammer killer case went cold, and the community moved on as people do. I moved further south to a different side of Denver. I never forgot that man in my yard, though, and always felt he might have been the same man who murdered that family. As the years went by, more information came out, and they linked the murder of the family to a vicious murder and rape of a woman in another community, Lakewood, as well. They also linked him to a savage attack on a couple and a flight attendant in Aurora through DNA. He was a serial predator, and he was active in our community the whole time. Fast forward to 2019, and I am watching the news. I can't believe it. They have solved the cold case of that family's murder from 1984, as well as the other attacks. They flash the picture of the suspect across the screen, and my heart stops. It's him. It's that man I saw as a child. I have that face saved in my memory because he spooked me so badly. I said something about it to my brother, and he shrugged about it. I mentioned it to some friends, and they said that was creepy, but there was no way I could have remembered something like that. I thought they might be right until the news also showed some photos of the suspect when he was younger and likely committed the murders. That is exactly the man I saw. I know it. It's changed the way I think about things. It's changed the gratitude that I feel for my life. What if he hadn't tripped on our sleds in the yard and somehow made his way into our house? My sisters and I could have been the ones on the news. I got a temporary job with Google driving one of those vehicles with a mounted 360-degree camera system. It was a fun job. I was tasked with recording highways, streets, and sometimes off-beaten paths in the middle of nowhere. I was assigned a company vehicle, and I worked as a one-man unit. They paid for gas and a hotel, and I got per diem for food. Pay was about $7 per month before taxes. 1099 employees with no benefits, though. My car was my office, and I would work 5 to 10 hours a week. I wouldn't have any human interaction for days, and it was a lonely job, but I enjoyed all the sightseeing adventures. The job was easy, but it required a lot of multitasking. You had a computer inside your car, had to navigate the road, and manipulated the camera system mounted on the roof. The job brought me to a small town somewhere north of Marysville. It was a quiet town and had a nice countryside vibe to it. I was finishing up my shift before my weekend, and I decided to take a shortcut by driving down the dirt road, which I thought connected to the highway. I really regretted doing that. It was 5 p.m. in the evening in the middle of July, so the sun was still out due to the heavy foliage and overgrown trees. The path I drove was really dark and creepy. The forest made for a scene out of a horror movie. I put my headlights on just so I had better vision. As I was making a sharp turn on this downhill slope, I observed my headlights reflecting on a yellow dead-end sign. Luckily, there was plenty of room for me to do a U-turn safely. This part of the dirt road was the darkest part of the forest, with only small patches of sunlight penetrating through the canopy from the overgrown trees above. Once my car was repositioned to exit the area, I looked in my rearview mirror, and I noticed someone standing behind the dead-end sign. It looked like a kid, maybe 13 years of age. He had one of those bowl-cut haircuts and wore dark-colored, raggedy clothing. His face was pale, and he had that 1,000-yard stare. I could feel his gaze locked in my direction. He had no facial expression. did not blink, and stood frozen in place. I felt I should check on his welfare and ask if he was okay. I rolled down my window and reversed my car closer to where the kid was standing. Once I saw the brake lights reflect off the yellow dead-end sign, I parked my car. I was expecting him to come to my driver's side window, but the kid never came. I looked into my rearview mirror, and he was gone. I didn't even hear any footsteps or the sound of twigs snapping. If the kid left, he must have been a trained ninja. The forest was eerily silent. The only sound that stood out was the engine from my car. I drove away slowly and egressed up the hill. As I came within 100 yards of the main road, I saw the same looking kid walking about 50 yards in front of me. It's possible it could have been someone else, but the dark-colored shirt, ragged jeans, and physical stature resembled the kid from earlier. His back was exposed to me. I couldn't make out his hairstyle or skin complexion from that distance. He walked away from the forest onto the main road and walked eastbound. I waited until he was out of sight before I exited the forest and drove in the opposite direction. I was so frightened I didn't even bother to check the rearview mirror. I redlined the hell out of the car and booked it for dear life. Our cameras worked via the LiDAR system and automatically recorded 360-degree panoramic photographs while the car was in motion. At the time of the encounter, my camera was recording. Therefore, I suspected the kid was likely captured in one of the images. I reviewed the photos from where I made the U-turn at the dead-end sign. Nothing. No kid, no shadow, not even a silhouette of a person of any form. The only photo captured was the yellow dead-end sign, the overgrown trees in the background, and dust particles from me driving on the dirt road. I reviewed the same recording from the second sighting of the kid upon our exit. Nothing. I had zero evidence of any persons being captured in any of my recordings. I don't know if it was due to the lack of sleep, being dehydrated, or my eyes playing tricks with me, but I'm pretty sure I saw a ghost. This took place in February of 1988, when I was just 8 years old. I am now approaching my mid-40s, and I still have massive anxiety when I think back to that night. For context, I am a male and have always been the shortest person in my class with a smaller body frame. I was living with my mom, my stepdad, and my older sister, 3 years my senior. Because my parents were extremely poor, we found ourselves moving around quite a bit. At the time this story took place, we were renting a rundown duplex in Utah. I am fairly confident this took place on a Wednesday evening, as that was the weekday my family would gather around the television and watch America's Most Wanted. After the TV show had ended around 9 p.m., we said goodnight and headed off to our own bedrooms. It was a school night, so I often went to bed around 9. Our duplex had 3 bedrooms, 2 on the main floor and 1 in the basement. My room was on the main floor, down the hall from the living room, while my mom and stepdad's bedroom was adjacent to mine at the end of the hallway. My older sister had her room in the basement. At that age, I was fearful of the dark, so I often slept with my bedroom light on, allowing perfect vision, because my parents never paid their bills anyway. They never had an issue with this, as most parents might. We also had a false sense of security living in a small Utah town, so we never locked our front door. However, my mom and her husband always had a lock on their bedroom door and made sure to lock it every night, so we kids wouldn't come in unexpectedly. I remember drifting off to sleep shortly after laying down. It must have been around 1:00 a.m. when I was abruptly awakened by a peculiar noise in my room. As I sat up in my bed responding to the noise, I was horrified to see 2 grown men sporting biker beards and easily towering 6 feet tall standing in my bedroom doorway. Again, I was able to see every detail of these slovenly men because my light had been left on. The men standing in the doorway were blocking me in my room so as not to run past them. They both had the most evil stares directly into my eyes that I have ever seen. I was petrified. I don't know why I did this, but in a moment of complete shock, I jumped up from my bed onto my feet. But only then did it dawn on me that my little body was not going to be able to get past them. My parents' room was directly towards their backs, and my first instinct was to run to my parents' room. Looking back now, I realize it would have done no good since they slept securely and comfortably behind their locked bedroom door while this was taking place. Once my body motions caught up to my thought process, I instead ran to the corner of my room and crouched down. In the meantime, the three of us are awkwardly staring at each other. I tried to let out a scream to call for my parents, but this would be the only time in my life where I was paralyzed with fear. My vain attempts to scream mounted into silent desperation. I didn't know what these people wanted, and I could only imagine the worst. One of the men pushed his index finger to his lips in order to signal to me to remain quiet. As I tremble with fear, the second man reaches into his pocket and pulls out a 6-inch blade. My room is fairly small, and they are both standing within 4 feet of me. He makes sure to swivel the knife in the air to make a point that he's not afraid to gut me like a fish. I nearly pissed off my pajamas. Another attempt to scream yields nothing. Shortly after, they close my bedroom door on me, and I am left alone. Instinctively, I thought they were robbing our house, but now that they were exposed and had threatened me, they would leave. Boy, was I wrong? I waited a few minutes. Do I open the door and try to pound on my parents' bedroom door? Are they waiting for me behind the closed door? Who knows? After a few minutes, I gathered what little courage I could and decided to crawl back in bed, place the sheet over my entire body, and wait it out. Were they planning on killing my family? I asked myself. Did they leave yet? What do they want? My anxiety grew as the thoughts continued to race through my mind. As I lay there intently, listening for any sounds, I could hear them moving about the house and opening and closing various kitchen drawers. The walls were paper thin in that cheap duplex, so every move was easily heard. Next, I hear them make their way down the stairs to the basement, where my sister is sleeping. As I'm listening to every frightening sound, I hope with all my might that my stepdad will wake up. He was a fairly large man, and these creeps weren't exactly being super quiet. This goes on for nearly an hour. I'm lying petrified in bed, listening to their every move. To my horror, my entire family is sleeping through the entire ordeal. After some time, I hear the front door shut, and the early winter sun is rising. My stepdad worked in a factory and usually woke up at 5 a.m. I couldn't wait to hear my parents unlock their bedroom door. As soon as I heard their alarm, I left my room. I was hysterical while trying to explain what had just happened. Next, my sister woke, and I desperately wanted her to tell me about her night by herself in the basement. My parents tried their best to calm me down. Tears were running down my face. I had been traumatized. To my disbelief, my parents chalked it up to having a bad dream. In fact, I was told this was not possible, because if anything like that ever happened, surely they'd wake up. My sister saw the desperation in my eyes and knew this was serious. Her and I went through our entire house to look for items that might have been stolen. We came across her dresser drawers left half open and many personal items out of place. This was enough evidence for her to become just as frightened, because nothing was missing from our house. My parents didn't bother calling the police. I was made to go to school as though nothing had ever happened. Fast forward a couple weeks. We are watching TV, and an update comes on about a criminal being captured that was featured in Most Wanted. My heart sank when I recognized the mugshot on TV as one of the men in my room. Of course, disclosing this to my parents only made them believe me less. To this day, I still hold some resentment towards my parents. While they slept peacefully behind a locked bedroom door, I was being victimized. Needless to say, I never sleep without locking my door. Thanks for letting me share. So let me start out by saying I enjoy writing. So this will be long, but will hopefully be an interesting read. I also admit that I have absolutely no memory of this experience. I was a little over 2 years old and just starting to walk on my own when this event took place. My mom only told me this story around 3 years ago when I was 32 and about to get married. My mother was raised in a very tiny fundamentalist Christian community and had no belief in the paranormal. She believed that our souls sleep until Judgment Day, or something like this. Ergo, there are no ghosts or spirits to haunt houses. Even over 30 years later, she still sounded terrified as she told me this. This woman, who always talks way too loudly, was literally whispering by the end of it, and she was white as a sheet. I believed her completely and still do. My mom never talks about stuff like this. I'm just glad I can't remember it too. In 1988, my parents had their second child. This was my brother, Victor, alias. We were very crowded in our rented flat with 2 babies. My parents decided to move to a rambling old 2-story farmhouse on a 7-acre plot in southern Ohio for more room for the family. It was way out in the sticks, and it took almost an hour to get to town from there. My mom said the first time I saw the house, I freaked out. I was crying and saying things like, "Don't like mean houses. Mean house, ugly house. Don't like. Scary house, mama. Don't like, scary house, mama, don't like." My mom says this behavior was very out of character for me, but I stopped complaining about the house after a few weeks, so she chalked it up to the stress of the move. Now this house is ramshackled and in the middle of nowhere. The kitchen was to the far rear of the house, and until recently before we moved in, still had a working ancient wood-burning cooking stove against the back wall. This had caught the back wall on fire a couple of months before we moved in and caused a lot of damage. A lot of this damage wasn't fixed, so my young, broke parents got a very cheap rent agreement. Gotta love the 80s. On the second floor, directly above the kitchen, was a locked room. The landlord claimed it had heavy fire damage, but her son, who had done the repairs, claimed the only fire damage left was in the kitchen since it had been the worst and was beyond his skill level to fix. Either way, the landlord was adamant that the room was off limits, and my parents always respected that. I would have looked 100s. I know all this because I heard stories about the crappy farmhouse with the creepy door my whole life, and there were pictures of us in and around the farmhouse. The locked door was right next to the upstairs landing, so there was no avoiding it, and both my parents have told me it gave them the creeps. A few months after we moved in, my mother and I were in the yard with our pit Doberman mix, Boss. She was hanging laundry, and I was rolling around with the dog. She said that just as she noticed that everything was way too silent, Boss started going apeshit from surprisingly far away. About 500 yards from the house on the left, there was a small duck pond. Boss was in between the two, running towards my mom, then turning and running back towards the pond, barking frantically the whole time. My mom saw something thrashing around in the middle of the pond. She took off towards the water at full speed. Boss beat her there and drug me out of the water himself. Thank you. Pupper, I love you. Although my mom was confused about how I got so far so fast and how I got into the center of the pond since it was over my head and I couldn't swim, she figured she underestimated me and brought in the baby gates and playpens. I was to be contained from now on. A few weeks later, she was cooking downstairs. Boss was outside. Victor was asleep in his crib, and I was in my playpen in my room upstairs. I also had a gate on my door and one at the top of the stairs. The stairs ran up from the side of the kitchen, so my mom said she could listen for us crying or fussing while cooking. My mom said no longer than 15 minutes after the last time, she looked in on us kids. Boss started going crazy again in the yard. She runs up to check on us. Victor's still sleeping. Every baby gate is still shut and locked. But I am not in my room. A frenzied search reveals I'm not in the house at all. A sudden image of Boss saving me from drowning causes my mom to rush outside to see what he's trying to tell her this time. She said he was running circles in the yard, barking uncontrollably. When she got outside, he took off towards the right, away from the pond. He would run ahead, turn around, and bark at my mother, waiting for her to catch up a little before racing off again. He ended up leading her for almost a mile and a half, out onto the dirt road that separated our property from our neighbors. He led her to a thick stand of trees on our neighbor's side of the rocky drive. She said what hit her first was the foul stench of advanced decay. She plowed into the trees with her heart in her throat and her stomach full of ice. She said she noticed many piles of corrugated tin, tarps, tires, and other debris. The miasma was emanating most strongly from these junkyard cairns. Peeking under a sheet of tin, she discovered the extremely decomposed corpse of a butchered cow. As she headed deeper into the thicket, where the tree cover was denser, she said less care was taken to cover the remains. Grisly pieces of bones and rotted chunks of bovine littered the area. Apparently, our neighbor, in an effort to cheat his taxes, had been illegally slaughtering cattle and hiding the remains in, at least, one of the few thick stands of trees around. She found me in the dead center of this thicket, just standing there looking around like I was confused, surrounded by carnage. She said I didn't seem scared or anything. I was just standing. She rushed over to me and, after ascertaining that I wasn't injured, began questioning me on why I was here, how I got there, etc. Keep in mind that although my mother said I started speaking very young, I still didn't have much of a vocabulary. She said I told her, with that serious look only small children can give, that the children brought me here, shatting her pants at the thought that anyone, even children, could walk right past her through the kitchen, get me from upstairs and walk right back past her on the way down the stairs and out with me. She demanded to know what children and where the hell they are now. I looked at her dead serious and told her the ones that live with us in the room at the top of the stairs and that I didn't see them anymore. After a moment of stunned silence, she started asking all kinds of questions about these children. However, she told me that I refused to say anything else. She said that as long as she questioned me about what happened, I would just stand there, staring at her with a serious expression and my mouth closed. She said the same pattern held true every other time she brought it up to me, so she was always left wondering and immediately began hounding my dad about moving closer to town. While the incident with me getting to the pond was highly unlikely, it was at least remotely possible. My mother is adamant that being in the hidden slaughter yard that day was simply impossible. She says there is no way I could have even known it was out there, much less have the ability to open and relock the baby gates, get downstairs, past her, and end up almost 2 miles down the road, and in this place in under 15 minutes. I was only 2 and as slow and clumsy as most toddlers. As I said, she is still shaken by it after 30 years. Personally, I have no idea what happened that day. I've thought about hypnosis, but haven't yet decided. I really want to remember. Maybe it's better to let it be a mystery, because whatever those things were, I really don't think they were children. We've all heard that children and animals can see things that we can't. They're more sensitive to the paranormal supernatural side of things. I didn't really believe this at first, until my own kids were born. They've all had their own experiences, but this one is about my youngest daughter. I will call her Bella. My father-in-law was one of those people who begged for grandchildren. Every time a family got together, it was always, "When are you all going to give me grandbabies?" Well, it happened, and he was a phenomenal grandfather. He was never too tired to play. No mess was too big, and he never said no. But life happened, and sadly, he passed away from a heart attack. My girls were 2 years old, and Bella was just 8 months old. It shattered us, even me, because he's been in my life since I was 14. He was a second dad to me. It hit my 2-year-old pretty hard. But Bella, I thought, was too young to understand, obviously. Fast forward to Bella being a little over a year old. Every time I'd hold her, she'd look off into corners and walls where nothing was and smile, wave, etc. I just thought she was being a baby and doing weird things. But then she learned to talk. This is where it gets eerie. I listened one day and heard, "I know you miss Rowdy, Papa, but Nana is taking care of him." Rowdy was his pet Shih Tzu. I walked in to ask her who she was talking to. She replied, Papa Troy. He misses Rowdy. Oh, and he said, tell Nana happy and sorry. I knew she was trying to say anniversary, because their anniversary was the next day. My mouth dropped. Over the years, Bella would talk about him working in the coal mines, the machines he worked on, his friends, and their families. Things she was not told about. Then there was another big incident where we were all freaked out. He wore a set of dog tags that he never took off. When my mother-in-law boxed up all his stuff, she misplaced it. She was so distraught over it. She babysat my girls one day and called me crying. Bella found his tags. I was confused. She explained that she was walking my girls around outside, and her wedding rings on her fingers started to feel like they were burning or tingling. She ignored this, but Bella said, Papa is trying to tell you his tags fell into the vent in your bedroom. She went inside to look, and there they were. Bella is 6 now, and barely remembers these things. But I think it's safe to say that she could see her Papa.